begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present to all the lands we are meeting on today. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much, KB, for jumping on and speaking with us today. It's magic to have someone of your esteem here talking to us and just leading us. I think it's fantastic. Just the session's going to run. We're going to ask some questions that have been pre-planned of KB just for the first 30 minutes or so. And then I think KB is going to ask you to put questions in the chat box so that she can answer them. And yeah, pretty much just go ahead and raise your hand or chat box and we'll go from there. KB, I think you're on mute. Are you on mute?
Yes, my dog was ringing her doorbell, so I was trying to not. We may, if I stay off mute, we may have to just put up with my puppy.
Okay, awesome. Well, look, again, thank you very much for coming today. KB was the CEO of the Seattle Storm when I was playing over there. She's now the GM of the Los Angeles Sparks in the WNBA and has had massive success as an administrator in the WNBA. We just want to get to know you a little bit better, understand your journey, and yeah, ask some questions. So I'll just get moving. Have you got anything to say before we start?
Well, I'll just say, Lauren, thanks for having me. You and I have had a couple of these conversations, and I always enjoy them. I'm a people person. I do believe that I've had a pretty interesting and exciting journey, and I for one, really enjoy and appreciate any opportunity to connect with other people who are passionate about sports and pursuing careers in sports and curious about sports. So I consider this a privilege. So thank you for doing that. And the only other thing I'll say is, to the degree I had any success in my 15 years with the Seattle Storm, I owe much of that to Miss Jackson. So Lauren is just a legend. As much as she's a legend in your country, she is an absolute legend in the United States, the WNBA, and particularly my hometown, Seattle, Washington. So Lauren and I shared many, many years together and had a lot of success. And I owe so much of that to her. And she's just somebody who makes everybody around her better, and grateful that we had the time that we did.
Thanks, Kathy. That's lovely. All right, we'll get started. First of all, how old were you when you decided you wanted to be in sports admin? Did you love basketball beforehand? And do you feel like you were ready when you got the opportunity to sort of step into the roles that you got as a youngster?
Gosh, I thought you were going to start by asking me how old I am. I was not going to disclose that information. I am one of those, like I'm sure many of you, that love sports from the moment I can remember. My parents tell stories about how I just always had a ball around, soccer ball, basketball, softball, baseball, any kind of football. Just loved sports, demonstrated a passion and love of all the games I played from a very, very, very early age. So, pretty early in my thoughts around what do I want to do next. I'm one of those typical kids that I think I changed my career. I think about this conversation now. I have a daughter who's a freshman in high school, and how many times she may change what she wants to do with her life. And I was no different. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a police officer. I wanted to be an archaeologist. I am not sure where that came from. But as I got later in high school and then starting to think about college, starting to think about areas of studies in college, I knew I wanted to do something in sports. And I'm old enough that there weren't professional women's leagues in my country, or if there were, I knew. And now, of course, I know there were some, but they were in isolated markets. I had never heard of them. And so I didn't, the job that I've now held for almost 30 years didn't exist. So I couldn't possibly have dreamt of it. But I knew I wanted to work in sports. So at some point, midway through college, I decided to study communications because that's the only career I knew I didn't want to coach. I wanted to do something sort of in the business of sports. And so I lasered on being a sports reporter. At least I thought, okay, I enjoy writing. I enjoy storytelling. Maybe that's a good way for me to sort of stay around the game. In terms of like shaping my career, I just had really great opportunities at a young age, starting with internships in college. And then as soon as I graduated, we'll talk a little bit more about this later in terms of the importance of mentorship, but very very early after I graduated, I had the opportunity to work for a woman who just took me under her wing. And it really changed, I think, the trajectory of my career. And so I was coaching basketball after college. I was still kind of kept a profile in the basketball community. And so when the American Basketball League came to Seattle in, I think it was 1995, I had 4 or 5 years of work experience. So they saw me not just as a basketball ambassador, but I had enough work experience that they entertained the idea of me having a front office role. And, a year later, I was the GM of that first women's pro basketball team in Seattle at the age of 28.
Wow. Do you feel like you were ready when that came along, or was it one of those things that was daunting? And like, how did you feel being sort of thrust into a position like that so young?
Oh, I remember it so vividly, Lauren. So I'll say it this way. I mean, ready in some sense, no, because I didn't even know what the job entailed. And I remember I was going to take like a 50% pay cut. They were basically paying like minimum wage. And at this point, I'm 4 or 5 years into a pretty successful project management career. And, so I had exposure in that track of managing budgets and working with people, solving problems, sort of was in a good work rhythm. So I sort of started to understand kind of what I thought my skill sets were, had worked for some really great leaders, including this woman that I mentioned. But again, readiness, I didn't even really know what it took, but I remember telling myself, nobody's going to be more passionate about this role and nobody's going to work as hard as I am. So I just went into it knowing I had enough kind of general business acumen, but more important, and I love the game. So it's a sort of a business role, but in an area that I was just so passionate about, and knowledge of the game was high. But I just remember really saying, I'm not going to get outworked. And,
Yeah,
and at that time I'm 26 years old. And it really was the beginning of what has been now a 30-year career in women's basketball.
yeah, right. So during this time, do you feel like you had great sort of leadership and mentors around you? Who were the people that really sort of pushed you and helped you sort of navigate your way through that?
I'll say the first mentors and role models really, really fortunate to be able to say it was my mom and dad. Like they, supported everything I did. So in terms of just being around and being raised by people who saw me and related to me and tried to prop me up, confidence is a big part of my story. And, I know that came from home. And and then I mentioned this woman, certainly throughout my playing career, my coaches, I had the pleasure of playing for some really amazing coaches who were not only great X's and O's people, but great leaders. And, I've always prided myself on trying to learn from everybody around me. And then this woman, after I graduated from college, I did an internship for her, and ultimately she gave me this first project management job. And she was masterful at challenging me and sort of throwing me into new situations to really test me, but always being there to catch me and to guide me and just I think about the 4.5 years I spent with her before I jumped into sports, and it's life changing. And I've had the pleasure of acknowledging her and sharing that story with her over the course of the last couple decades. And she sees me now, and I'll never forget. She told me I was probably 23 and I'd been working for her for now a couple years. And I'll never forget, we were at lunch and I think I had gotten a promotion or something. And she did a toast in front of this table of people. And she said, we're all going to work for KB someday. And I remember that moment vividly, because I think at that point, Janet was really kind of planting something in me that I didn't really know that I was capable of. And I think, people talk about representation, they talk about role models, they talk about mentors. It's a really, really key piece of my story and my journey.
Yeah, wow. So on that, what sort of, I guess, like education did you have behind you before you went into this role? Was it more the internship and the actual hands-on training that helped you sort of be ready for that? Or was it, do you think the work that you did, the skill sets that you got at university?
I get asked this one a lot. I get asked particularly about students who are coming out of undergrad and contemplating some of these sports management master's programs. And I'd start by saying everybody's journey is different. I think for me, getting work experience. I was eager to get out of the classroom and really test and learn in a workplace environment. So that's what worked for me, and it ended up really paying off. I tell everybody, and it's true, I'm the dumbest one in my family. My sister has like 4 master's degrees. My brother's a PhD. They're both teachers. My brother's a professor at Xavier. And I just have a lowly, BA in communications in undergrad, right? So for me, my journey is all about work experience and really getting in there and kind of using the skill sets I obviously learned on the court and in the classroom, which for me were predominantly just people skills, like learning how to relate to people and build teams and relate to teams. And, very early on, I was a pretty emotive person, both on the court and off the court. I've always been just really extroverted and social. And very early, I learned that I could use that to bring people together and inspire people and rally people. And I think I did that as a member of a team and captains on my basketball teams, but I very quickly learned that that was going to also apply to the office and the workplace. And I leaned into that really pretty early. And I think I didn't feel like I was going to be able to really unleash as much of that in an academic setting.
Awesome, thank you. What are some of the biggest challenges for you on your journey in sports administration?
I'd say probably the hardest thing in women's sports, and maybe not a challenge, but hard. I think to differentiate, what's been really hard, it's been exhausting, all the advocacy.
Yeah.
Like, and you think about where we are now, that is not where we were 30 years ago when I started. And I just remember how confusing and exhausting it was that not everybody got it. Like, how do you not get, and I'm talking the WNBA. So this isn't like not even the ABL, which happened in a little bit, sort of smaller narrative, but this is the WNBA. This is a women's professional basketball league launched by the NBA. And I think I just took for granted that once the NBA got in the game, so to speak, that the rest would just take care of itself. And that was anything but true. And so, like, that was both hard and challenging. And I think, and the wins were harder to find. I think now, as I fast forward to where I am now, there's been so much progress and so many wins. There's still a challenge there in advocating and fighting for more, and we'll probably never stop doing that. But I also have that with a long, almost 3 decades of a lot of successes and a lot of momentum and a lot of progress to lean on, that fuels me to keep that from being sort of demoralizing or intimidating or frustrating, which it really oftentimes was in the early days. The other thing I'd say, and one of the things I said to Lauren before we started, as I'm speaking and answering these questions and anxious to get to Q&A to invite some of you into the conversation, if I say something or tell a story that you want me to elaborate on, that you have a follow-up question, let's please do that. But the other thing I'd say, that just from a practical standpoint, a challenge for me was I went through 4 ownership changes in 7.5 years. You were a big part of many of those, and thankfully we had that championship in 2004, which sort of helped kind of offset some of the challenges. And for me, there were times in those early days when I was part of this NBA organization, big organization, before we broke away and were an independent team. It was really lonely. There were some really, really lonely days early on, because I didn't feel like I could go to my NBA counterparts, because for fear of maybe feeling like I'm complaining or I can't handle it. And then I couldn't really go to my staff because I'm trying to keep them motivated and inspired. I certainly found some solace in some family and friends, but I didn't even want to do that too much, because I felt like I was maybe disparaging this thing that I'm trying to get everybody so fired up about. And so probably one of the biggest challenges for me early on was just the loneliness in holding just holding this responsibility and this sort of being this chief steward of this beautiful thing we were all trying to grow, but it was, just fledgling for so many of those early years.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I'm going to ask a question that wasn't on the list, KB, because I want to sort of explore that a little bit. But I guess, there's been a lot of talk about, commercial partnerships and investment in women's sports and how we, obviously we're very different to men's sports. What's your philosophy on that and trying to sell women's sports? Like, what do you think around what's key to getting people to buy into women's basketball? And obviously it'll be different in America to what it is in Australia, but it'd be interesting just to get your thoughts on that.
I'm gonna answer that by telling you how it's evolved. Okay. So when I first got in, I dare say, I already alluded to sort of how I took for granted come in and there'd be this onslaught of support. And because from my perspective, this is just pent up. We've just been waiting for this and here it is. And so maybe some like entitlement even, right, in the early days and sort of expectation. And then that very quickly turns to frustration. About halfway through my tenure with the Storm, I evolved that into what I would call kind of best of both. So I got to a point where I wanted the leverage deals. So the deals that were coming by virtue of the NBA team selling them into our partners, and maybe they were giving us away, maybe they were allocating a little bit of money, but got to the point where I said, I'll take it, right? Like we need it. So I'm not gonna look a gift horse in the mouth. But then the other piece of that was also making sure we had resources and strategy around selling ourselves. And so there was a point in time where that frustration and confusion turned to almost resentment around the leverage deals and like feeling like, what you don't think anybody wants to buy us? You're not even trying. Then it turned into, actually, I'll take that, but I'm going to complement that with our own dedicated strategy. And I'm going to make 1 + 1 4. As I sit here today, the way that has really turned, and one of the reasons that I got into working primarily with investors in women's sports is one of the things I've said to many investors. If you're getting into this because you think it's the right thing to do, or you think it's a good thing to do, or you think it's a charity, and then you're not doing us any favors. Invest in this because you think it can grow, because you think it's a great investment, because you think there's untapped potential, because you think the opportunity is big, and come in and invest in that opportunity as you would any other business. I think what happens sometimes is that initial investment comes in, and perhaps not unlike a donation, or they write the check and they think the work is done. And quite frankly, you write the check and the work is just beginning. And, look, I think I'll tell you one other thing that I say to my fellow women's supporter advocates. Don't expect it. Go fight for it. Go earn the money. Go earn the partnership. Because at the end of the day, in my 2.5 decades, the best partners are the ones that we earned and really sold in on all the merits. And it wasn't leveraged, and it wasn't carved out, and it was a 1-to-1 relationship that was mutually beneficial. And those partners tend to stay with you. They spend more, they activate, it's authentic. Those are the best deals, because the amplification of the partnership assets and what you actually do with the investment is tenfold the check they write. So the leverage deal, is that nice to have in the bank account? Sure. And like I said, there was a stage in my career where I'll take it. But the deals that worked better for the team, and the deals that we worked harder on behalf of, are the deals where the check writer was fully engaged and invested in our mutual growth.
Great. Thank you. So moving on a little bit here, have you experienced gender discrimination in any context in any of your roles? Like, any sort of stories around any, any sort of gender issues or biases or things like that that have impacted you along the way?
Well, I'll start by saying this. So I used to call it I coined this pretty early in my career. I was definitely in my early 30s, that I felt like I had this trifecta. I was often the youngest in the room, not anymore. I guess for much of my career, I was often the youngest. I'm no longer the youngest, which means I'm getting really old. I was often the only woman, and I was almost always the only gay person. So I came out at a young age in my career. And so it's interesting, Lauren, because I also didn't have a ton of awareness around discrimination. Like we didn't really talk about it in our home. I didn't really experience it. Maybe my parents never really talked about it. Certainly globally, I knew what it was and had heard stories of discrimination from victims and whatnot, but it just wasn't something that I was super exposed to. So I almost just think I wasn't looking for it, or I don't even know if I know what it looked like. But what I say to people is that I don't really remember any. So I guess I consider myself super lucky. And if I did, they were maybe subtle, and so I wasn't quite sure. But what I do remember is if I felt like there was an awkward moment or exchange, or somebody was sort of whispering and I was insecure and didn't know if it was about me, I didn't know which of those three things it was about. Were they discriminating because I was a female, because I was gay, or because I was, 30 years old and they were twice my age? They thought I was young and immature and so there were definitely moments of insecurity and questioning, maybe private conversations, but nothing really overt. And like I said, I guess I should consider myself really lucky that I think I just worked with a lot of really, really great people, including a lot of really great men.
Yeah.
And the only other thing I'll say to that, very early, I talk a lot about currency. Currency comes in a lot of different forms. And at a very young age in my tenure with the Sonics, the only woman, youngest SVP, thrown into, I was on the board owners again with people like Howard Schultz. And, so oftentimes I'd sort of say, how did I get in here? Very quickly, I learned that the currency I had for relationships wasn't always valued in every room. Okay, so I learned to sort of maybe use that as a strength and a differentiator, but also dial that back if I felt like, I always talk about know your audience. And a lot of times in boardrooms, I felt like I'd walk into that and I would definitely adjust my behavior and my cadence and my interactions, not to the point that I'd leave myself at the door, but just knowing my audience and knowing the room and what had currency in the room. Very early in my career, I learned that results had currency. So I really, really focused on driving success of the business and making those known. And I think very early on in my tenure with the NBA team, that was highly noticed. I was promoted every year, every single year for like 10 years straight until there was nowhere else to go. And I take a lot of pride in that. Came in as like a manager, went to director, senior director, VP, SVP, CEO, COO, like every year was promoted up the ladder. And I think it's because I drove results, and that is the currency that our leadership wanted.
Yeah.
So it wasn't about culture, it wasn't about, some of those other things that I think maybe I was good at and trying to pay attention to. And not that I didn't do those things, but in terms of what I talked about to them and made sure they saw was the things that I knew they cared about.
Great, thank you. On that, I guess we'll just sort of jump into the family. I'd love to sort of hear your story around your family, and I guess some sacrifices and just dealing with, the juggle of being such a high performer in sports admin, and then the toll that it's sort of taken on your life, your family.
Yeah, I mean, my nuclear family, I'm the oldest of three kids, just amazing home, amazing childhood, really close to my siblings. Unfortunately, we just lost my mother. But my parents and just the upbringing that I had is my foundation. It's what I fall back on. It's what propelled me. And to this day is the same. My family's very involved in my career, always has been. Lauren was my mother's favorite player. And I mean that. You could look at her social Instagram account and there is a picture of Lauren, and my mother just absolutely loved Lauren Jackson. My daughter grew up around her. My daughter now, I've been in this long enough now. My daughter's 15, and to be in this again at this level in this moment in time, to have a 15-year-old daughter who is, just it brings me just a tremendous amount of joy. And I know what it means to have your boys around and to have them had a chance to watch you play. And it's just everything to me. Family's everything. Family's my center, always has been, always will be. But learned the hard way not to be married to my job. I'll never forget the day. There are two very distinct, my inability to understand balance and prioritization and boundaries cost me my marriage. Which I, regret, but learned a lot from it. And thankfully, we're still very, very dear friends and fabulous co-parents. But I remember two things that my partner said to me I'll never forget. Number one, these are different days over the span of however many years. But I came home one time and I came in and I'm sure I had a really stressful day, and I probably came in on the phone, and, she was probably trying to connect after a long day with the baby. And I can't remember what I said, but she said, "You're not the CEO of this house." And I remember thinking, I was probably an asshole enough at that point. I probably went, "Really? I'm not?" Oh, I probably, I've grown a lot from then, but I remember thinking about that later. I can reflect on that now and laugh. Clearly it was not funny to her. She meant it. And what it meant was, when you come home, we're partners. Like, I don't report to you. I don't work for you. I'm not your boss. You don't get to boss me around. You're not this, like, just change your energy. Right. And I wasn't mature enough or self-aware enough to really meet that comment in the moment and change my behavior. I can see that now. And then I remember another conversation where we sat down and she said, "Lindsay, do you want to peek in and say hello?" Lindsay's probably hearing some of these stories about her mother and I for the first time. This is my daughter, Lindsay. Oh, I can unblur. We'll make this a family moment.
Hello.
Lindsay turns 15 on Wednesday, folks. It's a big, big week in our house. But I remember another time we sat down and, you're having challenges in your relationship. And I was probably so into my job, I didn't really know what was happening. People say, "Oh, how could you possibly be surprised?" I was probably one of those that was surprised. But I remember her saying, "Okay, of friends, family, work, and me, where do I rank? Like, tell me I'm not fourth." And I couldn't tell her she wasn't fourth, because it was family and then it was work. And the reason it was friends before her is that it was the guys that I'd go out with after work to talk about work. And it was the friends that were in the industry that I needed because I was lonely and I was stressed out and I needed help. It wasn't her, right? Like my relationship was work, and it wasn't the work. It wasn't the kind of work that was filling me up like my job. And, I can say all of this now with just a tremendous amount of clarity and regret and vulnerability. But in the moment, the storm was my life. It was my identity. I poured everything I had into that. And it was super hard. Those ownership changes in that short amount of time kicked my tail. And partly because every time we went through a change, I was convinced that if I didn't stay and I didn't do it and I wasn't in that room, we wouldn't survive. And of course, that's not true. Every organization is bigger than any one person, but I had convinced myself that I had to run myself into the ground for the cause. And that was a big mistake, costly mistake for me.
Thank you for sharing that. I've got a couple more questions on here. I'll probably just I'll do two more, okay, and then we'll open it up to everybody that's on the call. So if you've got questions, everyone, can you please just put them into the chat box and we'll get to them in the next sort of 5 minutes or so. But I'll finish off with these two questions, and they're more sort of technical, but I guess from watching you operate over the years, I've sort of seen you build teams, you know, in the front office, and who are so passionate about the sport. I mean, obviously people that are involved in basketball or sport love sport, and have to because of the commitment. But how have you built culture in your teams, in front offices? Like what sort of things have you focused on to sort of build that connection with the members of your teams?
I'll say a couple general things and then I'll try to get more specific. First, I would say there's no one way to do it. Okay, so I think understanding who you are and standing in your authenticity as a leader is really important, because you'll be the most effective leader you can be if you're true to yourself. So wherever that place is, that is a beautiful place from which to lead others. And I would also say that, you know, learning yourself and really understanding self-awareness in terms of, from a practical standpoint, strengths and limitations and growth areas, in order to put the right people around you and to have the right people in the room to accomplish the work is really important. Because I think so much of the beauty of leadership and team performance and the challenges of leadership and team performance are a direct reflection of the alignment between the people in the room and the body of work. So if those things are not aligned, that contextual environment and those circumstances drive a lot of the symptomatic things that people say, oh, she's not a good leader. Well, it's more than that. And you know, as you and I know, during COVID, I took some time away from the industry, and I went off and got my license in executive coaching. So honestly, that was a life-changing experience, because what I didn't realize I was going to learn, I got into that because I wanted to help other leaders. What I didn't realize I was going to get out of that was really peel back the onion on myself. And, you know, as I share some of these stories, it's through the lens of going through a lot of this auditing of my own journey. And so when I talk about what I now experience, or my clarity around certain principles or variables, oftentimes it's because I didn't do them. It's what I didn't do, but what I recognize now and I'm trying to do now in this new organization, which is why I'm so thrilled to have part 2 of my WNBA career. There is without a doubt, I am a much better leader than I was 15, 20 years ago. No question.
Wow. Well, it's going to be awesome to see what you do then. It's exciting. And I guess just on that, like, what would you tell your younger self now, having had the experiences that you've had and been through so much? What would you change going back?
It's always a hard one, because I love exactly where I am. I love my life. I love the work I'm doing. I love my family. I love the people around me. I love myself more than I ever have. So I don't know. I wouldn't change. I don't think I'd change a thing. I think the advice might be in that story, or in that comment, is that everything we go through shapes us. And how we reflect on those experiences, use those experiences, share those experiences, allow them to penetrate us as evolving humans, is what makes that an opportunity or a constraint. And I feel like I've tried to use all my adversity and lessons and failures to go forward better. And you know, there's so much in life out of our control, so much. In fact, if we think we're in control, we're delusional. So in terms of experiences, and it really is about how you walk through that. That is what we get to control. And I think I've tried to just take in everything and sit with it and reflect on it and try to figure out the lesson in it, and then just keep going. And again, I talked very early in the time here about confidence. There's no question that growing up, having parents who just encouraged me in everything, and I built those confidence muscles really, really early, that when someone said you can do anything, I mean, I believed it.
Yeah.
And so when I struggled, I knew there'd be a better day ahead. But I think the other thing, part of my story is, give yourself grace. Like I had to learn to be graceful with myself late in life. And, I went through a stage where I really was really hard on myself and beat myself up pretty badly. And just, I think being graceful with yourself and patience. I'm still working on that one. I'm a super impatient person. But just, I think that grace and perspective, maybe perspective is the word. And I just, that I touched on it. The world did not revolve around me. The storm was not going to fail if I walked out or got hit by a bus. It was not. It was going to be fine. And who knows, it might have been better. But that notion that it's all on us, if you think about it, it's a little bit narcissistic. I would have never seen it that way, because I thought I was like, but we don't need heroes, right? We need humans.
Mm.
And I think for much of my career, early part of my career, I tried to be a hero, and now I just want to be human. That might be the title of my book, LJ.
It's a good one. It's a good one.
I did. I think I tried to save everything, everyone, and it cost me a lot. And I'm not sure I really helped people. I think I know I could have been a better leader if I would have been more human.
Do you think that would have taken a toll on you as well? Because I know, look, I remember being back in the storm too, and the issues that you had to deal with on a daily basis, whether it was the athletes and the coaches, the front office, partners, whoever, sponsors, things like that emotional toll. If you are taking that on board, how did that affect you? And then how did you deal with your mental health around all of that?
I mean, right, like mental health, I didn't even know what that was. Like what, like, I perhaps I'd still be married if I understood what was happening with me spinning. I was in spin cycle.
Yeah.
Because of all the things I've just mentioned. I was lonely. I didn't know where to turn. I didn't feel like I could find solace with her. So I would spend more time away from home. And like, I was never home. I found not reasons to be away from home, but reasons to stay at work. And it wasn't that I didn't want to be home, but I wanted to be at work, because I just felt like the harder I worked, if I left, like it wasn't, it's like that idea. I know it's cliche, but really early part of my career, it fits, is work smarter, not harder. And I didn't know that. I had to learn, depletion and rest and recovery. And, even as an executive, that's a really important. You definitely have, depreciating value in your brain and your energy, and, opportunity costs of not being rested. I mean, there's so many things on sleep, and but I didn't know any of that.
Yeah.
I just literally grinded myself.
You did. I remember.
I did.
Look, so I've probably gone over my quota of questions, so I'm going to we've got a couple of questions in the chat box now. So this one's from Maddie, particularly in that stage of your life when you were talking about financial contributions, partnerships, things like that. The organisation where you were accepting any financial contribution that came your way, did you ever run into a situation where you were provided with a financial contribution that challenged your personal morals, or that you thought might not be aligned with the overall goals of the organisation?
Yes, that has happened on multiple occasions, kind of early on. And of course, we're in such a different day now than we were when I started. But I'll say this, I'll answer this differently by saying kind of where we are now, or at least for me in this current environment and the organization I'm in, we are so values driven and, will not take any investment from an owner or a partner that isn't completely aligned with the very clearly stated values that represent the Sparks and the causes and initiatives that are important to our franchise. I think one of the things we do have to navigate is, as the athlete voice continues to just be on blast, you have to be mindful that you also have individual athletes that are on your team that, there are differences of opinion. And as I've said to my daughter many times, inclusivity and respect works both ways. So as much as I say we want to align with organizations that advocate and believe in what we believe in as an organization, it's also important that you respect alternate points of view and figure out how to navigate that, particularly when they might play for your team. And what does that look like? So it's an area that I think is still evolving, and it probably always continue to always will, because sponsors are a really, really important part. But yes, there are any number of examples where there have been behind the door conversations around different companies and their values and whether or not we do business. And again, 25 years ago, that wasn't even questioned, but we're just in a different day now. And so thankfully, at least there's awareness around it. I think because of awareness and intention, hopefully more often than not, you're hitting that alignment opportunity.
Great, thanks. We've got questions coming in thick and fast now, so I'm just going to go through them one by one.
Yeah, I'll try to give shorter answers.
Whatever, just however you want to do it. Karen, thanks so much for your time. You mentioned promotions earlier. Did you spend time campaigning for promotions, or did they come to you from your performance? Now, as a leader, do you prefer your employees coming to you, pointing out they should be promoted?
Good question. Promotions always came to me. I was always one of those that, in spite of my confidence, I didn't really know how to advocate for myself early on. And I also remember I learned from my grandfather that you earn everything. And I think I always assumed that if I was doing a good job and I'd earned it, you would tell me. So I didn't even understand how to go ask for a promotion. So it's not a muscle I ever developed. And thankfully I didn't have to, in the sense that they sort of came my way. I am a huge believer in self-advocacy. I think oftentimes what this generation gets accused of is just sort of entitlement, and you hear some of that talk around millennials and whatnot. I guess my perspective on that is, don't expect somebody else to advocate for you as much as you would advocate for yourself. But what I try to tell young people who work with me or for me or around me when they want to talk about promotions or they're frustrated about opportunities is to really make sure I just tell them to get curious about it. Like, when was the last time you had a performance review? How does your boss think you're doing? Where are you missing the mark? Like, I think sometimes where it does creep into entitlement is when there's an expectation absent curiosity or accountability. But I think if the curiosity is there and all the other intangibles coupled with, results and performance, absolutely advocate for yourself. But go in sort of with some sense of understanding of what the person who is going to consider the promotion, what their perspective is. So perhaps before asking for a promotion, certainly before assuming a promotion, go sit down with your supervisor and find out how you're doing. Because if that conversation doesn't go well, you run the risk of being sort of misunderstood and misperceived, and you could get labeled pretty quickly. And so I think you want to err on the side of, again, demonstrating some curiosity around it. But in no way would I advocate that for any of those things should take the place of self-advocacy. I'm a big believer in self-advocacy and fighting for what you want. But I think you got to understand how you're doing in the role you're in. I think what I'm often struck by is the young person who wants a promotion and, they're not even performing well in the job they're in.
Yeah.
So I think making sure you're rooted in reality and understand that reality is not defined by you. It's defined by the person making the decision on whether or not to promote you. And at some point, if that relationship's not a good one, you probably should figure out a different place to go work. That relationship with that direct supervisor. And somebody said to me early in my career, think about who you hitch your train to. And I've been really fortunate that I made choices, they found me, and I made choices to hitch to the right people.
Great advice. Davey from Kiwi Hoopers. Oh, we've got a Kiwi here. That's good. Hi, Davey. Welcome. First of all, thank you for sharing your experience, especially your personal stories. Also, thank you. Okay. As a GM, if you could have any WNBA player as your personal bodyguard, who would it be and why?
Personal bodyguard. Have you guys have seen Lauren Jackson throw her elbow, right? I might say LJ. Oh, that's a good, gosh, I've never been asked that one. Bodyguard. Who's the biggest strong? I might say Lauren. Partly because, look, what's a bodyguard's job? Bodyguard's job is to protect you. I know what I will say this. I know how much Lauren loves me. So if anybody comes anywhere near me, she will have my back.
That's just the person I am. So, it's pretty. Okay, we've got another one here, Sarah Monk. Hi, KB. Are you good at delegation? Can you speak about how you've got better at assuming you have you got better at, and can you speak about how you have got better at, sorry, I'm just trying to read through this as we go, and how you let go of things, how you go handing things over to other people, so delegating roles and responsibilities.
Such a great question. And Lauren can give you my email. I'd be happy. I'll send Lauren a delegation matrix that I've used a lot. I discovered it. I can't remember the name of it. I discovered it, and then I've used it with a lot of my teams, and I used it with a lot of my executive coaching clients. And it's a really great framework because I don't think you can effectively delegate until you really understand the levels of delegation and the idea that delegation is situational. So the variables that go into, and this is why leadership is so amazing and so hard, because it's a practice you never stop working on. Because once you understand concepts, leadership concepts, it's about then practicing them every day so that they become habit. So I'd like to say that ever since I discovered this delegation matrix, and I use it, I try to use it as much as I can, that it's now sort of becoming just how I lead. But it basically talks about the different levels of delegation. I think there are 6, but it talks about the process you go through to really understand time. So how much time do you have on the task? The complexity of the task, the person doing the task, their relevant experience in that task. Is it something they've ever done before? Is the clock ticking? How complex is it? What's the risk? And you go through this kind of sort of variables on delegation. And then based on assessing those variables, you delegate at the appropriate level. So at the lowest level of delegation, and don't quote me on this, but it's something along the lines of, it's more directive. The highest, so it's like, here's what I want you to do, you go do it and you check back. The highest level of delegation is essentially, you inform me what we're doing and we have a check-in, and there's like 5 levels in between. But again, you don't get to the appropriate delegation level and communication of such without having gone through this very quick assessment, because I can delegate very differently to the same VP, because it depends on how much time we have and the sense of urgency. So how much risk is invited in that task? Is it something she's done before, or she's doing it for the first time? Or is it something she has a high degree of competency and she's done many times extremely well? Or is it something they've done before, but last time they did it, they didn't do so well. So there's a little bit more coaching involved. But I'm happy to share that with Lauren and have her send it out. It's been a super, super helpful tool for me, and everybody I've shared it with has reacted really positively to it as a really practical tool.
Awesome. I will definitely share that with everyone on the call. Christy Collier, 2 questions. Have you had imposter syndrome in your career, and how have you managed it, and how do you deal with public criticism?
Imposter syndrome, probably. I think, I talked a little bit about the trifecta and sort of not really fitting in. It was a room of all white men, twice my age in most cases. So yeah, did I feel like I belonged? But I knew I was there for a reason. I knew I had something to contribute. So maybe not quite imposter, because I did have that confidence and I had that foundation of my experience and my love of the game. And again, I knew nobody in that room was outworking me, and nobody loved the game more than I did. And my job, just the responsibility I had. And I'm a big believer in aligning responsibility and authority. And I had the responsibility, so I always fought for the authority. But definitely moments of insecurity. And could I do it? And, is this going to work out? And, but probably not quite imposter, because I know I've had a lot of friends and colleagues talk about that. And I don't think mine ever sort of rivaled that same level. Certainly insecure moments and moments of questioning. What was the second part, LJ?
How do you deal with public criticism? So just for a bit of context, Christy is actually the head of our WNBL league here in Australia. So she's, it's a huge role, and she's done great this year. But I think, just that sort of insight into how you've dealt with that will be really helpful, particularly for her.
I'll say this now, but this isn't how I responded, when I was younger. But when I was younger, like, I took it really hard. Right? Like it was my dream job. I wanted to do everything extremely well. I knew the stakes were high for our sport and my town, and felt a lot of pressure. And so really hard. That a lot of the loneliest days were days when, somebody was questioning something. And of course that was all before social media. I mean, now so ask me in 6 months after I go through a Spark season after being a GM, and let's see if people like the team I built and whether or not we win any games. But, I mean, now it's, thankfully I'm older. I have nothing to prove. I want to do well, but not everybody agrees. And so I think what I'd say now, and what, in terms of my perspective on it is, the criticism comes from a place of passion, and we're nowhere without passionate fans. And I also, this is what I say to my friends and family, the criticism comes from people who have like 5% of the information, maybe 7, sure as hell less than 10.
Yeah.
So it's like, you have to put that criticism in perspective. They're criticizing something they have very little knowledge about. And so you got to put it in the right box, Christy. You got to say, they're reacting from a place of fandom. They have very little information. I love their passion. I love that they're taking the time to scream at me and tell me I'm an idiot in my job. Like, you got to just park it in the right place.
Yeah.
I'm so thrilled to see more WNBA players in the WNBL, by the way. Congrats on a great season. We just picked up Carly Samuelson. Ray Burrell was playing over there. So just exciting to see so many players playing over there. I need to get there next year.
For sure. That'd be awesome. Kristen, what is the greatest challenge that the WNBA currently faces, and how is the Sparks navigating this?
Just continued, like for sure, exposure, just continuing to make our games and our athletes more accessible. And we've made a ton of progress on that. Viewership is up just exponentially in our league, in addition to obviously the metrics you've all seen around the college tournament this year. So now the next part of that is, with increased exposure, with more outlets, with more channels, with social media, what are we doing strategically with our athletes to really resonate and tell the right stories in the right moments in a way that resonates with our growing and diverse fan base. I just thought of one more thing about the public criticism. I think there's something to be said for leaning into it. I have found a little bit of a superpower in kind of paying attention to it and parking it in the right place. But, you know, I think it's important to be in touch with your critics. It doesn't mean you give them too much mind space, but I think it's important to be in touch. Sports, it's consumer driven. So you can't turn off 20% of your consumers if they're mad at you. That's an important part of your fan base. So again, you don't get too caught up in it. You park it in the right place, but don't completely turn it off. Stay in it long enough to understand what it's about and maybe what's the underlying issue that these fans are reacting to. So sorry.
That's a really good point. It's sort of trying to put yourself in their situation as well and trying to understand where they're coming from.
And sometimes, you know what, sometimes you can really diffuse. I've had fans scream at me and then I'll call them like, hey, what's your number? Here's my, like, cause sometimes they like humanize it too. Like it's easy to like scream at a team or a logo, but it's like, no, I'm a person. I have feelings too. Right? Sometimes when you just give them a conversation, and by the way, when the first 3 minutes, when you give them 5% more of the information, which is double what they already had, they kind of go, oh, I didn't know. Yeah, of course you didn't know. But again, we're all fans, right? Have we all screamed at a team, a coach, a ref, a player? Like we all do it. Yeah. It's when it comes with that sort of vitriol and hatred that it gets a little like it's displaced, but feel sorry for them. Be compassionate for them.
Good advice. All right, we've got one more question. We've got 2 minutes left. Thanks, KB. Great insights. What tips can you provide to those who are feeling like the world will stop if they were to step away from their roles? Basketball at community level. There are many feeling burnt out, but don't know how to share the load rather than completely step away. And you kind of touched on this before.
Yeah, there's a lot in that one. I mean, I think I would just tell you, you're wrong. The world won't stop. I'm speaking from experience. Doesn't mean you're not needed, doesn't mean you're not extremely valuable. But if for some reason something happened in your life that forced you to leave tomorrow, that organization would respond. However they'd respond. I'll share another piece of advice that one of the Storm owners said to me. This is after the NBA team had left town. Now the team was bought by 4 local women. And I was going through a process where I had to learn now. So for the first 8 years of my career, I was in this behemoth organization, fighting and advocating every single day for the Storm. Now I'm the CEO of an independent team where everybody that walks through that door is dedicated to the same mission and passion that I am. And I didn't know how to switch gears. So I was still fighting and advocate, right? And I remember one of the things Lisa said to me is, I need you to hear me when I say this, and this comes from a place of love and coaching. And she said, the more you hold on, the more you constrain others. And I'll never forget that. And I've shared that with many others that I've worked with. And she was absolutely right. And the minute she said it, I knew exactly what she meant. And from that day forward, I tried to develop new muscles of delegation. And, you know, because for so many years, unfortunately, with the NBA teams, I think there was some truth in if I didn't do it, it wouldn't get done. Not that it wouldn't survive, but if I didn't do it, it wouldn't. There literally weren't other people to do it because they had other jobs. And I remember her saying, the tighter you hold it, you're constraining others and you're constraining the organization because you're only one person. And unless you start letting go and empowering others and coaching others up, we'll never get where we want to be. And by the way, in the meantime, you're gonna crush yourself.
Well, I hate to say it, but it's 101. Hey B, thank you so much. You're just the way that you're able to speak and connect with people, but your vulnerability and the way that you're able to lead it's incredible. So just thank you so much from my heart for jumping on and talking with us today. You're an amazing woman, and we hope you do great things with the Sparks this year. So thanks again for your time, and we will get that delegation matrix to everyone that's on on the call today. But yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, we'll be watching with great anticipation this year.
You're very, very welcome, Lauren. As I said to you the first time you reached out, I would absolutely do anything for you. So if in some small way through our connection, you know, we've helped impart some of this to those of you on the call today, it's a privilege, it's an honor to do anything for you and anything you're about. So and if any of you are in LA, just let me know you're a friend of Lauren's. We'll get you tickets to a Sparks game, and Lauren's promised she'll bring the boys over for a game. But I mean that very sincerely. If you're ever in Los Angeles, please, you can find me. I'm pretty easy to find. I'd be happy to have any of you and your friends at a game this summer, but really appreciate the opportunity. I wish you all the best. Thanks for taking an hour of your time to be here today and all the great questions and great conversation. And Lauren, I love you dearly.
Love you too. Thank you so much. You're the best. It was awesome.
All right, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.